the Flashforge AD5X, a Core XY machine with built-in multicolor printing and quick swap nozzles, all at a reasonable price. Could this printer be a great first machine to get you started in 3D printing? Perhaps be your first introduction to a Core XY printer? Or is the AD5X holding itself back just a little too much? Let's take a look. Flashforge were kind enough to send me the AD5X to take a look at today. However, no money has changed hands and you'll be seeing this video at the same time they are. So you can expect my unfiltered first impressions of this printer. And while overall I do think this is a great machine, I did run into one major issue that has me questioning whether I will continue to use this printer. After hoisting the printer out of the box, setup really was as simple as removing some packaging, plugging in and sliding the screen onto the front, attaching the IFS multicolor mount to the side of the printer, then slotting all of its components into place, linking the various filament tubes where needed before plugging this box into the printer, and finally undoing a few screws to release the print bed. So all up, it took me about 12 minutes to get this printer out of the box, set up and ready to power on. Once I booted up this printer, it took me through the usual process of connecting to the Wi-Fi, gave me the option to connect the printer to an account via the Flashforge app, and then ran itself through a series of leveling and vibration calibrations which took less than 10 minutes. Once that was done, I went ahead and slotted a couple of the included filaments into the printer, where I could easily assign their materials and colours on the display, and use them to print out one of the included files on this machine, the Flashforge coin. As with all single nozzle multicolor printers, this machine has to purge material to swap colours. It uses a familiar nozzle wiper and ejection mechanism to other printers, and spits the purged material at the back of the machine. I would have preferred if the purged material was spat out the side of the machine, but I'll probably end up printing a collection bin at some point anyway, so I should be able to redirect where that waste goes regardless. A single colour change in a print doesn't require much in the way of waste. But as we'll see a little later in this video, that absolutely changes when you decide to make full use of the IFS system. The Flashforge coin printed up great and super quickly, clocking in at 15 minutes, which means that from getting the box on the table to having a finished test print, I was looking at about a 45-minute setup time, which isn't bad at all. The coin looks pretty damn good, no bleeding between the colours, and good adhesion to the print bed, but something I am noticing here is a slight difference in the finish on the top face. Wherever the nozzle has had to move to fill in gaps on the top layer, there is a small but noticeable height difference, and this is something that will crop up a few times until I figure out how to fix it later in the video. And with this print done, slotting the PEI build plate back onto the machine was super simple, thanks to the little stoppers in both back corners, meaning that I can line this up perfectly every time. It's a small thing, but something I really appreciate. All of the other printers I have either have no mechanism for slotting the plate back in, or a slightly janky one. Given my first print was rather successful, I wanted to immediately run off and print something a little more complex, not worrying too much about any further calibrations or testing just yet. So I went ahead and downloaded Orca Flashforge, Flashforge's own fork of Orca Slicer, which is pretty much identical to the base version, just with the added benefit of being able to fully control the AD5X over Wi-Fi. If you're looking for a more in-depth look at this slicer, or want to know the functionality differences between Orca and Orca Flashforge, I'll leave some links down below because I won't be going into detail on that here today. To actually get this printer to show up in my slicer over Wi-Fi, it did seem that I had to create an account with Flashforge and download the app to scan that aforementioned code. And at the time of recording this video, that app is not available on the Google Play Store, but rather as a direct APK download. That is unacceptable and needs to be fixed. If you have a companion app that is borderline necessary to set up your printer, that needs to be verified and available on the Play Store. But regardless, once I had that downloaded and my account was linked, it popped up in my slicer no problem. I have also noticed there does appear to be a LAN option right here on the printer, which should be a good workaround if you prefer that over using the app. I then imported some supportless multi-part D&D terrain prints, some giant mushrooms, slicing them just using the default 0.16 settings, and sent them over to the printer. The default speeds for this printer's profile struck me as very fast. These are speeds that I know would result in subpar prints on most bedslingers, but on the Core XY machine here, even at these near breakneck speeds, I was immediately seeing some amazing results on these terrain pieces, all with good bed adhesion and nice looking layers. And heck, even these very risky overhangs printed up okay. I also printed up some functional pieces that will eventually slot into my shelves with some dowel to hold rolls of filament, and these printed up great with even the default support settings. But as you can see, we're still suffering from those imperfect top layers. And at first I thought it was just a poorly calibrated bed level. So I hit relevel and tried again, only to get the same result. At this point I ran a ton of tests. I tried to calibrate my line widths and flow rates, I tried reinstalling the nozzle, I even tried disabling Z-hop and retraction to see if that was the issue, and none of it seemed to help. Eventually I thought back to that leveling process and realized that there was never anywhere for me to input a Z offset. No way for me to tweak the height of the printhead to see if that was the problem. Which is when I discovered that Z offset does indeed exist on this machine, it's just only available, as far as I can tell, after you've started a print, where you can go into the settings on your current print and adjust the offset there. And it also appears that this is available in the slicer to adjust this there. Overall, this isn't a huge problem, the function is still there. However, I could see it being quite easy to dial in your Z offset over the course of a couple of prints, only to have a sliced file overwrite that number, or swap print profiles in your slicer and forget to update your offset. It just feels odd to me, having Z offset be tied to your individual prints, rather than having it be a universal setting accessible during homing and leveling. But after dialing in this offset, I started seeing much more even first layers that were no longer squishing into the bed, as well as much more uniform, flat top surfaces as well. Now that I had Z offset dialed in, I printed up a Gridfinity bin and some of these Dungeon Blocks D&D terrain, all of which had nice smooth top faces, even on all these little details. And I'm very impressed with how cleanly this printer is able to print these sharp overhangs. So far we have the AD5X successfully printing with its stock 0.4mm nozzle. Great looking prints, no issues, no errors. Unfortunately, this is about the point that I started to have a few issues with this printer. I wanted to try out a smaller nozzle on this machine. The smallest nozzle currently offered for the AD5X is a 0.25mm, so let's give it a go. The quick swap nozzle system here is akin to others. Remove the faceplate, take off the silicone sock, and unlatch the nozzle. But here we also flip open the heatsink to reveal the nozzle inside. And then we can just slot in the new one. This works great, but I do have to wonder how this will fare after many uses. A single piece of thin metal is all that fastens the nozzle in place, so I'll be keeping an eye on that as I clock more hours with this machine, just to see if that grip ever loosens and causes a wobbly nozzle. But at least for now, it seems to have a firm grip on the nozzle, and I haven't had any issues with them wobbling. With the smaller nozzle installed, I started out by printing this Supportless Wood Elf from Arbiture Minis, using the highest detail profile for the 0.25 nozzle. This profile has a layer height of 0.1, which is simply too thick for most miniatures, and makes for some very visible layer lines. So I bumped that layer height down to 0.08 to try and improve our results. And while the printer does seem fully capable of doing this, I can see why the default minimum is 0.1, as we are seeing some minor stringing and a little bit of fluff at 0.08. Sadly, this grey appears to be slightly translucent and hasn't made for the best showcase of miniatures, so I'll quickly rerun this print with some pink, and we can see those details much better. Even with the fractionally larger 0.25mm nozzle on the AD5X, I think it captured just as much detail as this same mini printed on another machine with a 0.2. But supportless models are easy enough to get right, so I decided to run a few more tests, and this is where I started running into issues. I loaded up a more complex print, multiple small models all requiring some level of supports. The AD5X started up and was looking just as good as the previous prints, until it got to a certain point and just stopped. I got this error message pop up, and after rebooting the printer, it tried to resume and just sat there for 10 minutes. And from here, I kept having this issue print after print. Any job that had more than 5 or 6 small pieces on a plate would get 20 to 30% of the way through and just throw up this error. I swapped back to the 0.4mm nozzle and it was business as usual. No issues whatsoever, not even a hiccup. But as soon as I went back to the 0.25, I had this error pop up once again. So I tried to print some different models, tried to reseat some of the cables as the website suggested. I even tried different layer heights, different G-code resolutions, tried sending prints to the printer over Wi-Fi and USB, all with absolutely no luck, getting the same error every time. After fighting this error for about a week and a half, I did eventually decide to reach out to Flashforge. And I'm not sure whether it was my message that got passed along or whether by sheer coincidence, but a few days later, a new firmware version popped up on the screen. And I'm very happy to say that after that firmware update, poof, never had that error again. At least for now, it seems that error was entirely software based. All that to say, after my first few prints I really did want to love this machine, and I still do really like it, but there are some kinks yet to be ironed out. Luckily, it does give me hope that firmware versions and patches are rolling out so frequently. There is clearly effort being made to make these machines the best they can be, but alas, I'll save my full thoughts and feelings for later on. First, let's take a look at these minis. First up was tree-style FDM supports on this posable Saturnine model, setting all of the pieces up and using the support painting tool to try and get the best results possible. I did have an instance or two where some of these small parts were knocked off the plate, but after I started using the included adhesive, I didn't have a single print come free from the bed. These prints look clean, and after removing the supports and getting the model glued together, we have a very nice looking mini. Next up, I printed this advanced FDM spider by Aperture Minis that uses custom-made resin-style supports. I was a little concerned that the 0.25mm nozzle might throw a wrench in the works for these very specifically fine-tuned models, but they all printed up great. Sure, the supports were a tad tougher to remove, but they still came away easy enough, and even without much post-processing, this model looks great. After the firmware update, I tried reprinting one of the models that had failed on me 5 or 6 times, this Demon Brute, and this time I'm happy to say no issue at all. I still need to dial in my tree support settings properly for this printer. They were a tad strong and a little hard to remove, but with some effort, this model was looking super clean with a great amount of detail. Finally, I wanted to really stress test this 0.25 nozzle Core XY printer with a resin to FDM print. Thin, resin-style supports on a very delicate miniature. And of course, full video up here if you want to see my process for that. And since a Core XY machine doesn't have the X and Y movements working against each other so much, I decided to bump up my usual speeds, and to be honest, these are some of the cleanest resin to FDM results I have gotten. The slightly larger 0.25 nozzle and semi-glossy Flashforge PLA did make the supports cling a bit tighter, similar to the spider from earlier, but I was able to tear off the supports without too much issue, just using a knife where needed, to reveal a very clean FDM miniature. So, the 0.4mm nozzle has given us some great looking prints. The 0.25 has given us some amazing miniatures. Yes, there were some issues and errors, but they're hopefully a thing of the past. But those issues and errors did get me thinking about multicolor printing with this machine. Was there some nasty surprises waiting for me there as well? I loaded up this cute Ghastling model at the request of my partner and threw a few various colours on it. Loaded up the printer with a few different brands of PLA and hit go. Of course, we had all of the usual culprits of multicolor printing. Egregious print times and a ton of waste, but no errors, no hiccups, no complaints whatsoever. And sure, the final print does weigh less than the waste it produced, but this experience is what you expect from a multicolor print. And to that effect, it did its job great. A super clean print, no bleeding even when using unknown filaments, and no errors to be seen. So now that I've dived into everything I could want this machine to do, what do I think? Overall, I think I really like this machine. It's not perfect, yet the issues I ran into all seemed to stem from software or firmware issues, the app download, handling the Z offset, and the error codes I ran into. That is stuff that can be worked on, but it is a shame that those issues hadn't been caught and ironed out sooner. I do have a couple more thoughts and observations now that I've been using this machine on and off for a couple of weeks. The AD5X is not silent, but it's not super loud either. I think it probably sits somewhere between my A1 and my Neptune 4 Pro in terms of volume while printing. The Core XY build of this machine keeps its design nice and compact, and the IFS not requiring an additional freestanding module is great for keeping the printer's footprint small. The build volume for this machine clocks in at 220mm in all dimensions, which is a tad smaller than some of the 250mm and upwards build plates that we have been seeing on other machines lately. But unless you're trying to print full-size cosplay helmets as a single print, I don't think that's too much of an issue. I barely find myself filling up the full volume. The frame of the machine itself feels robust where it needs to, and there are now even replacement parts available for some of the printer's more critical components. Various pieces of the IFS, the screen, and all of the nozzles, which I know is something the community were very vocal about making happen. There is also now an optional camera kit and enclosure kit, if those strike your fancy, all of which are things I believe were made available in response to reviewers and early adopters of these machines. So even though the last few kinks are still being ironed out, and maybe not everything we want for this machine is available yet, I can at the very least have some level of confidence that it will happen eventually. For me, I think the AD5X will remain equipped with its 0.4mm nozzle and become my daily driver for household prints and tabletop terrain. The speed and accuracy of larger prints on this machine are something I have already come to value, and knowing that I'm able to get great results if I throw the smaller nozzle on there, should I ever need another machine printing minis, is wonderful. I don't know if the AD5X would necessarily be my ideal recommendation for your first or only printer. But if you're looking for a secondary machine, perhaps to get into multicolor, try out a Core XY, or want something that is capable of doing high-speed printing, then the AD5X is well worth considering. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful in any way, consider subscribing down below to stay up to date with all of my FDM printing and tabletop videos. Like if you liked, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.